Hi, my name is David Bose. I'm the Communications and Marketing Director for Washington Policy Center, and this is the first episode of Washington Policy on the Go for 2023. We're going to give people a bit of a chance to catch up and get on board. And while we do that, I just want to remind you that we changed the format a little bit. We ask questions throughout the program. So if you have a question at any time, just put it in the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll try and get to that question and incorporate it in the interview. Today is also the governor's State of the State address. So we're going to make this a little early in case some of you want to catch a part of that address or catch up on it during the lunch break. We will be talking today with Todd Myers, our Center for the Environment Director and author of Time to Think Small, his new book, which you probably received for Christmas or gave for Christmas. At least I hope you did. And then also we might address a couple of other upcoming events as well. I want to remind you, this is because the legislative session is going on right now. Washington Policy on the Go is every week. So we do weekly catch-ups with our center directors during the legislative session, and then we'll go back to every other week. So just a quick reminder on that. And then if there's any changes of dates or times, just watch your email for that, those changes, because we will alert you to any changes that happen for whatever reason as we progress through the year. Anyway, David Bose again with Washington Policy Center. I see many of you got a chance to jump on board. So let's get right to it. Todd, let's start with the good news about the legislative session, because I'm sure we'll have lots of time for bad news during the session. And that is that there's been some expressed interest in changes to occupational licensing and making it more possible for people to get work. Describe that sentiment and how it's manifesting itself. You're on mute, I should say.
Yep.
There we go. First of the year.
Nice. It's always nice to have good news on day one of the session, because there's what's coming on many of the rest of the days. But as you know, occupational licensing is something that I have worked on in addition to the environmental work. People ask me, sort of like, how did you get involved in this? And it's one of those things when you're around public policy, you notice certain things that don't make sense or seem particularly unfair, and that you take an interest in. And so I just started looking at the problem of excessive licenses, basically forcing people to spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to do training that is really unnecessary and excessive to get a job. And so if you want people who have low income, people who are immigrants, to come and get jobs, or military spouses, we often see people who have the training of done it in other states and are now coming to Washington State because their spouse has been stationed here. These licenses make it very difficult to get jobs, and they hurt the people that who don't have the money to deal with it. So we've been working on this for several years to reduce the licensing barriers, and it's been a struggle. The unions primarily are the ones who have killed it. Every time we look at a bill that says, look, you should judge people, give people a license based on competence, not based on just a random number of hours, the unions have testified against it. Even as absurd as we tried to reduce the barriers for cosmetology licenses and other things like that, and the state teachers union weighed in against it. For what reason, I don't know, other than they just, want to make life miserable for these people. I don't understand their opposition. And the additional interesting thing is that the Obama administration put out one of the best reports on the high costs of occupational licenses and how the disproportionate impact it has on low-income folks. So having worked on this and having made some progress, we actually, the last 2 years, we've had good bipartisan bills, but it's been a struggle. So on the very first day, go ahead.
Oh, it just reminded me, it's the first episode of 2023, and already I'm making a yes, Prime Minister reference, but you were asking why it is people would be object to it. It's like the thin edge of the wedge. Once you start judging people based on competence rather than just random inputs, then it's the end of civilization as we know it. Then you can do the same thing for other licenses, and it gets people to think, well, wait a second, maybe we could change the way we do a lot of things. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And so Yesterday, the first session, first day of the session, TVW was doing interviews with Speaker of the House, Lori Jenkins, and she was asked, she says workforce development is one of her top priorities, and mentioned this specifically of occupational licensing. And she said, frequently our licensing requirements over time grow into a place where they're actually protecting people from entrance, from competitors from coming into an industry. We don't want to do that. And she says what we need to focus on is competency, not about protecting people from entry and competitors in practice. And that's the way occupational licenses are used right now, is basically that the people who are already in an industry want to make it very difficult for competitors to get in, to drive prices down, to improve consumer choice and access and service, because they want to, charge high prices and offer low service. So the fact that Speaker Jenkins was so clear about this is really positive. And in fact, tomorrow a bill is being heard about improving access to licenses for military spouses. Now, even that bill is very timid. It says that it encourages agencies to make it easier for military spouses, does not require them to. So we still have a ways to go, even if this bill passes. California, passed a fantastic bill last year, 2 years ago, making it easier for military spouses to do work, basically saying that they could continue to work for a year if they had a license in another state while they tried to get up to current in California. Washington State won't do that. Washington State is really behind on this issue, behind basically every other state. A recent report from the Institute for Justice said that Washington requires licenses for more jobs than any other state. So we just have locked down access to jobs in Washington State, very bureaucratic, very restrictive. And the people who pay the price are often the people that the left claims that they care about, who are low-income minorities, immigrants, things like that.
It's a little crazy to me, and I understand the desire to encourage, but as you point out, you can encourage different officials as a government official with authority or as a legislative body, and they can say, yes, we received your encouragement, but we opted not to, for various reasons, and it's a total get out of jail free card,
Yeah.
So and you see that with the executive branch too. If the executive were to advise something, yes, we considered your advice and opted not to use it.
Yeah.
So
well,
it really
and
has
that's
to be
exactly the situation, is because last year this same bill on military spouses was offered before the legislature, and who opposed it? The very state agencies now, who the bill says, oh, we should encourage. Well, they've already made it clear they don't want to do it. So unless you require, they're just going to say, thank you, we have noted your encouragement.
Yeah. And it's kind of a bizarre thing, because if you're going to make the change, you got to make a change. Otherwise, you're just kind of perpetuating. There's a holding pattern to try to wait this kind of momentum out, and it needs to happen. As you point out, with military spouses, it seems like that should be a nonpartisan 99% support. You just want people to be able to go from one state to the other and be able to work there. It's an odd opposition. I would think that would be a really uncomfortable position to be in, opposing that, some major reforms in that area.
Yeah. Well, I hope that's the case. But like I say, the combination of agency opposition and union opposition has stymied a lot of these things. And just to show you how sort of ridiculous this is, if you want to be a manicurist in Washington State, you need 600 hours of training. I was able to get my pilot's license, rent an airplane, and fly out of Boeing Field after 50 hours of flying. So, it takes another additional 550 hours before you can deal with somebody's nails. Now, if you've looked at my fingernails, you know that I know absolutely nothing about manicuring. So this is not to denigrate the skill involved in manicuring, but I do think, if you can get a pilot's license in 50 hours, you can certainly train people safety and other important things dealing with manicuring in less than 600 hours.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, but there have been studies indicating that there's not a correlation between greater health and safety benefits and the number of hours that they're forcing people to jump through,
Yep.
which are expensive, and they suck up time away from family, time for childcare, time for time away from other work that they're trying to do in the meantime, before they can actually get this job. So it's more than just the cost. There's other auxiliary costs or related costs that hurt people when they're doing this.
That's right. And that Obama administration report that I referenced earlier specifically pointed out that licensing requirements are not correlated with improved health and safety protection. In fact, one of my favorite state Supreme Court cases was from the early 1900s, where they had a license that said that women couldn't be bartenders. They could be barmaids, but they could not be bartenders. And it just shows you sort of the absurd application of a lot of these things, which is not actually about health, safety, the well-being of people or the servers. It is about some other political motive. And I just think that that's, it's really ridiculous.
As a dad to 3 girls under 6 who got kid makeup for Christmas, I'm going to bring this up next time they ask me to paint their nails and say, look, I need another 590 hours before I can do this for you. The state of Washington, it's a law. So take it up with the governor. Let's move on to the issue of the increase in taxes on gasoline over the course of the year. You had a blog out, and it's not a direct tax on gasoline, it's a tax on emissions, which ends up being a distinction without a difference. But the new climate laws are taking effect, and the state is not telling the truth about the costs. Describe what they're doing, Todd.
Yeah. So at some level, this is more Todd's academic fight over what is true rather than, actually be meaningful, because we're about to find out what the impact is on gas prices, because it can be measured. Washington State, it fluctuates, but we were sort of on average about 50 to 60 cents higher than the national average for regular gas prices last year. So if that number jumps up, all of a sudden, we're gonna see it. So the new law, there's 2 new laws that take effect: cap and trade, which is essentially a CO2 tax, and what's called the low carbon fuel standard, which I won't get into because it's very complicated. And the low carbon fuel standard, at least this year, is likely to have very small impact on prices, about 1 cent a gallon. And one thing I do like to point out, just if, people debate our projections, but we projected in 2021 that the low carbon fuel standard would add about a penny a gallon this year. The Department of Ecology came out with its estimate of impact. They said it was a penny a gallon this year. They said it would be just over 20 cents a gallon in 2031. We said it would be about 20 cents a gallon in 2030. So we, our projections have been spot on consistently. The only area they disagree with us is on what impact this new tax on carbon dioxide emissions will have. So based on the Department of Ecology's estimates, we said, okay, it's $58 per metric ton of CO2. With some simple math, that translates into 46 cents a gallon for Washington State. The Department of Ecology says, no. It will only be 5 cents a gallon. That is absurd. They basically put their numbers into a macroeconomic model, did all this sausage making, and came out with a number. That approach is not used by any other jurisdiction. California uses the methodology we did, Oregon uses the methodology we did, and the Washington State Department of Ecology uses our method when calculating the low carbon fuel standard. But when calculating the cap and trade and the impact of the CO2 tax, suddenly they change. And the reason they change, of course, is because the number is going to be very much higher. They have a strong political incentive to say, oh, no, the increase in prices that you're seeing is not us. It's those evil oil and gas companies. And so that's the game that they are playing. And in some cases, this game gets really dishonest, where they say there is no gas tax increase. Well, a gas tax in Washington state legal terms and the state constitution means a specific thing. It means putting a tax on gasoline by the gallon. A CO2 tax is essentially the same thing because there is the same amount of CO2 in every gallon. So if you put a tax on CO2, you are putting a tax on a gallon, but legally it's different. So what they will say, knowing that they're playing a game, is there's no gas tax, but there is a tax on gasoline, and it works the same way. So if you're a driver, you don't care whether the price of your gas went up because of a gas tax or a tax on gasoline. But it is a really dishonest game that the Department of Ecology, and actually the director of the Department of Ecology particularly, is playing to try to hide the impact of the laws that they have passed.
And I've seen this work for them media-wise. I saw a fact check on some of our materials where, the label false was up there because it is not a new gas tax. There's no new gas tax. And, it was one of those times where you just want to pull your hair out because you're like, if you read Todd's material, the material that we put forward, it's very specifically says there is it's not a new gas tax. It is a tax on gasoline, which is different. And you explain yourself as you did just now. But it's frustrating when, people covering the story are being misled, and they don't, there's in some places, there's been a lack of curiosity to take that extra step to figure out how they're being misled,
Well, that's
lots of
right.
reasons for it, but it's frustrating.
And it's understandable because, it's complicated. I have declined here to talk about the low carbon fuel standard because it's very complicated. Cap and trade is also complicated. It is not a straight tax. There is an auction. So how much it will cost at the end of the day is based on a variety of factors, including how many permits companies have to buy. So a lot of this is in flux, a lot of this is uncertain, and they take advantage of that uncertainty. So I don't blame the reporters for being confused. What I do blame the reporters, though, is that when they get it wrong, they don't like to fix it, or saying things that are incorrect because they haven't read carefully. So for instance, the Spokesman Review did a story about projections of prices from the low carbon fuel standard and cap and trade, and cited us, didn't call me, didn't email me, but cited one of our pieces and said, here's what the Washington Policy Center says, but experts disagree. And they had two parts. They said experts disagree about our projections on the low carbon fuel standard, and experts disagree about our projections on cap and trade. And both of those things were wrong. And they had to issue a correction for the low carbon fuel standard part because they just simply got what we were saying completely wrong. But then the other part of it was that the expert that they cited, somebody from the University of California, Davis, who's very good, his quote in the paper made it clear that he actually agreed with me. And so I reached out to him and he said, yeah, I think your methodology is correct, Todd. And if that's what the Department of Ecology is saying that they expect the permits to be, your projection of 46 cents a gallon is correct. And the 5 cents a gallon from the Department of Ecology is wrong. So here's a story that is all about how experts disagree with Todd Myers, where the Spokesman Review reporter got what we said wrong and what the expert said wrong. So that's the frustrating part, is people intentionally demagoguing the issue and then confusing reporters, and then reporters not wanting to correct those mistakes.
I love that one particularly because you did say that California was using the same formula to figure out the pricing. And the only difference was we're not informing this expert that's being asked that, the pricing differences, so the individual is saying, oh, well, of course, we're not experiencing these large of jumps, but that's because they don't know what the projections are from our own State Department of Ecology, which is the numbers we're using. It's not like Washington Policy Center is making up some numbers and projecting. We're just saying, okay, it's a mathematical formula as clear as any other mathematical formula. You're projecting it's going to cost this for a metric ton of carbon, and then and then if if that is true, if that's the projection, then this is what the cost will be. So,
right, and what they argued is that in California, it's only added about 20 cents a gallon. That's correct. because their permit prices are $26 a metric ton. But if you use the Department of Ecology's numbers at $58 a metric ton, well, obviously the price is going to be higher, and that's going to be 46. So the reason California's prices have been lower, the impact on gas prices has been lower, that their permit prices have been lower. Now, in Washington state, the minimum that can be paid is $22 a metric ton. So that's 17 cents a gallon. So unless you think that the oil companies, out of the goodness of their heart, are going to eat 12 cents a gallon and only increase prices by 5 cents a gallon, we're going to see bigger increases than just 5 cents a gallon. So there's just, like I said, we will see. And so a lot of this fighting on my behalf about what the proper formula is and everything else is sort of pedantic, because the proof will be in the pudding very soon. But it aggravates me how willfully dishonest state agencies are about the impact of their own rules. They're supposed to be serving the public, not going out of their way to try to fool the public about the impact of their policies.
Yeah, the transparency here has been bad, and the accountability there has been worse. And like you say, it won't take long for, well, I mean, to me, you've already verified it. The expert that was supposed to be contradicting WPC material has now come back to say, oh, actually, they're right, because there's an input missing.
Yeah.
But this also speaks to the Washington State is constantly called in national press and other places. We're a leader in environmental policy because we have these big laws and big plans. So how are we doing with emissions? What is the great leadership of Washington State on emissions, and how do we hold up compared to other places?
Yeah, so the purpose, right? Sometimes environmentalists and the governor and other folks will justify the costs. Usually the governor simply denies the costs. He said, don't believe any of the swill that this is going to increase gas prices. But in those sort of candid moments, what he will say is it's worth it, right? We have to fight the climate crisis. We're all going to die. It's an existential crisis. And this is the price we have to pay to save the planet, okay? So then you say, okay, but are your policies working? And what we find is no. So the Department of Ecology just released the 2019 CO2 emissions. I know it's strange to be talking about 2019 emissions, and here we are in 2023, but those are the most recent data that they have released. And they found out that they went up again. The data we have shows that CO2 emissions have gone up almost every year that Governor Inslee has been in office. And what's remarkable is that when they released the 2017 emissions, showing that they were flat, basically the same as 2016, the director of the Department of Ecology at the time wrote a blog saying, hey, what this shows is we've turned the corner and they're about to go down. And then the numbers in 2018 came out and they went up. But they said, that's okay. And they wrote a press release and a blog saying, what we're seeing in these numbers is that they're about to go down and that our policies are working. And then in 2019, the numbers come out and they don't go down. They go up even more steeply. And yet, in the press release they sent out, they said, we looked at our policies since 2006 and they are working as predicted. Well, if they're working as predicted, why do you keep getting the prediction wrong every single year? Why do you predict every year that the emissions will go down and they go up? And one of the things that they will say is that per capita emissions are going down. Our population is going up, and so you can't hold us accountable for the fact that per capita emissions, are going up. They're going down, but there's just more people. One, that's not true. In 2019, per capita emissions went up also. But second, Florida now has lower per capita CO2 emissions than Washington State. So when you think of which state is supposed to be a leader in fighting climate change, do you think Washington or Florida? And yet Florida is doing better. And Florida, over the last 2 decades, have reduced their CO2 emissions, both in real terms and per capita, faster than Washington State. So when you hear the governor talk about how our policies are succeeding, how our policies are working as intended, just remember that Florida, who have not done the things that we have done, are doing better in virtually every area.
I feel like we've mentioned this for a couple of years in a row, where you've pointed out that the states failed. The governor, remember, famously changed his metrics when he went on the national stage, and the state website
Didn't
was
change
scrubbed.
them.
Sorry, they were
Scrubbed them.
erased them. Right. Just, he got the headlines. He was touting the headlines, but all of a sudden the state websites are scrubbed of all these metrics that were so essential to follow the science. And then, and so this has been kind of a recurring theme for Washington State. It is frustrating to see that year after year, and yet the narrative is the same in most major media, frankly. I don't know how to avoid it. I'm not trying to pile on the media. I just feel like there's some pretty obvious things here that,
well, what they will do is that all their stories said that CO2 emissions went up. But then they uncritically quoted the Department of Ecology saying our policies are working as planned.
Yeah.
And it's like, perhaps you should ask a question. How can they claim that when year after year they get it wrong? And yet that's what we see in the articles. And it's very frustrating. If people actually cared about reducing CO2 emissions and not just sort of making themselves look good, they would be asking, why aren't the policies working? What can we do to do better? And in fact, they never ask that question. They simply say, we're doing so great, even though the numbers contradict directly what they said would happen.
All right, here's a question for you from Donald. It says, Todd, were the increases in CO2 the result of fires or something else rather than what Governor Inslee's forcing upon us?
Yeah, fires are not counted in the inventories that they're doing. So they do have real impact. Obviously, managing forest health and reducing forest fires does help reduce CO2 emissions. But the inventories that they're using are primarily three things: electricity, home heating with natural gas and things like that, industrial emissions, and actually a fourth thing, the biggest one, is transportation. So those four things make up the vast majority of the inventory. So it's not forest fires that are driving those numbers.
Question from Bill. Didn't the MRSC also estimate 46 cents per gallon? I always love acronyms there because I'm in my mind, I'm like, manufacturers suggested retail. No, what? I don't remember this one, but MRSC, are you familiar?
Maybe. Several people have been quoting the 46 cent a gallon number, and that generally comes back to us. I think we also, the Washington Research Council also did good work that we relied on in this estimate. So Washington Research Council is the other source that has had good numbers. But we took their numbers and sort of translated them, did a little bit more translation. So those are the two primary sources for the 46 cents a gallon.
From Leo, what is or could be the immediate fix to reduce pricing?
To reduce the pricing on the impact on gasoline?
I'm assuming gasoline. Oh, yeah. Municipal Research Services Council.
Oh, okay.
From Bill. Yeah, I knew it was. I knew it was something.
So the what could be done to impact the pricing? Well, right now there's a range between $22 a metric ton and $81 a metric ton, and that so that's the range that the permits can sell for, and then the cost of the permit translates directly into gasoline. What's interesting, though, is that the first permit auction won't occur until the end of February. So gas companies are actually liable for taxes right now, but they don't know what the tax is.
Right.
So there's a lot of uncertainty. So the other thing is that we are going to be transitioning, right? This is a new system. So there might be a lot of volatility. So one thing the legislature could do is simply to take that $81 a metric ton and bring it way down, put a cap, either just turn it into a straight carbon tax, which like $22 a metric ton, and just say 17 cents a gallon, or bring it down so that you don't get that volatility as a sort of a transition phase in. So that's one thing that they can do. There hasn't been any interest that I've heard of in doing that. So there's still a lot of this uncertainty about what the ultimate price could be. And the fact that the Department of Ecology still has that $81 a metric ton cap, I mean, that's written into the law, so they can't just waive it. But the fact that they haven't, like, said, we need to fix this or we need to adjust this downward, indicates that they think that the price might go up. So as much as they say, oh, don't worry, the price won't go up, they aren't doing anything to change the rules to make sure it doesn't.
Right.
So there's a little bit speaking out of both sides of their mouth there.
I wouldn't mind if they also did something where the money would actually go toward roads and be protected in the highway fund also. Since, as you put it, it's the equivalent of, for a driver, 17 cents a gallon, except for you have no maintenance. And even though back when, heck, what was it, Governor Locke, when during one of Governor Locke's gubernatorial campaigns, remember, there was a great debate about the sad state of our roads and bridges, how they're in danger for the next earthquake, and it's going to cost people's lives if we don't invest in it. And yet, more and more of this money just gets funneled away to something else, and we don't do that.
Well, we just, last year, they passed a giant transportation package using some of the money from this new tax on carbon dioxide. And it didn't address the issue that you're talking about.
Right.
It didn't go to that. It went for buses and bike lanes and a variety of other things like that.
And I know you had one other blog since the new year that we didn't talk about, and I think we can do it very quickly. And that was, there was a very simple way to increase the number of salmon in the salmon runs short term, but it's going to be a wildly unpopular way because it requires the elimination of some very cute animals.
Yeah. So the Washington Academy of Sciences was asked by the state legislature to assess the impact of predation from seals and sea lions on salmon. We know this is a problem. In fact, the Washington Academy of Sciences report said that populations of seals and sea lions are higher than they were perhaps even pre-settlement, because tribes used to hunt seals and sea lions. And so because of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the population of seals and sea lions, what people call pinnipeds, it is higher than it has been in perhaps hundreds or even thousands of years. It's hard to know, but that's what the Washington Academy of Sciences said. The result is that they are eating potentially a huge number of salmon, smolt, and other things like that. There's a Long Live the Kings, which is an environmental organization that works to recover salmon, did this cool thing that I've talked about in my book, where they have these tags and you can follow your steelhead or salmon from the river all the way to the ocean. And it's a little competition and you choose one of them. The one I named was called Fishy McFishface. And you could see what it had to face and whether it would make it to the ocean. One of the years that I had it, my fish went out the Nisqually and then went back up the Nisqually and then went back down the Nisqually. And what it said was, it's been eaten by a seal. And that what's happening, what you're seeing is that the smolt now inside the seal is going swimming around. And so seals, we've known seals and sea lions are a big problem for a long time. And what this study says is that they're fairly certain that that's not the lone contributor, but a significant contributor to the fact that we haven't increased populations very much. So what they recommended was doing some tests, doing some pilot projects where you frankly, kill seals and sea lions to bring their population down and see if there is a population response from salmon to see how big an impact they're having. And I just think, okay, if you think that seals and sea lions are charismatic megafauna, fine, but their population is not in danger. They are very high population levels. Chinook, other salmon are endangered. And so if you can take some responsible steps to reduce the population, to increase a threatened and endangered species, that seems to make sense. It also will have a faster impact on populations than blowing up dams or a lot of the other things that we spend money on that will take a decade or more to show an impact. So there's a lot of reasons to do it, and I hope that people follow the science that is recommended by the Washington Academy of Sciences, rather than just sort of saying, "Yuck, we don't like that. Do something else."
It would also help the pinnipeds in the long run, because if you get the salmon runs healthy again, they'll be better off as well.
Well, and it helps the southern resident killer whales, because what's happening, frankly, is that the seals and sea lions are out competing
Yeah.
the southern resident killer whales for those fish. So so what you've got is endangered salmon, endangered killer whales that are both being threatened by seals and sea lions whose populations are extremely high.
Now, there's two quick semi-related questions I want to address before we close it up for the day, and that is because you're a jack of all trades, Todd. So first is from Don, and this one is closely related to the occupational licensing. He says there's a major shortage of licensed people in trades. For example, it takes 4 years, 8,000 hours to become an electrician, which is not unreasonable, he says. However, you can only have one apprentice per journeyman, which dramatically reduces the number of people who can become an electrician. A journeyman should be able to mentor more than one apprentice. I don't know the laws on plumbers and welders, but I guess it's similar. It makes it difficult to get into the trades. Is anyone looking into those issues?
Yeah, I mean, well, what he's talking about there is the limits on, apprentices and things like that. Those limits are not accidental, right? What unions want to do is to limit the number of people working in a job category so that they can charge very high prices and create scarcity. And so that's why the unions oppose any licensing reform, even if it has nothing to do with them, is because they want to create scarcity. Now, at a time when we have labor shortages, that's absurd. And yet the unions still won't let go. So I'm not familiar with the particular issue that you're talking about, but I can guarantee you that the unions are not, will fight very hard against any loosening of restrictions. We've even seen, concrete strikes and other things like that, that harm the economy. And the unions are for it because in the long run, it helps them. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in this area. And I was really pleased that the speaker, who frankly is supported by the unions and is on the union side, but at least she recognized it as a problem. And I hope we will make some incremental progress.
The next question is from Janice. I'm concerned about House Bill 1045, the quote, basic income pilot program. Sponsors say the bill will give a basic income to everyone in the state. They claim that due to climate change or a virus, people need government income. So all of the nonsense of the state get away with in the name of fighting a virus could happen again. If the government doesn't shut things down, there would be no need for any of this. Is the Washington Policy Center aware of the bill, and do we plan to fight it? Well, I can answer the first part there. The second part there is, we provide information and then other people choose to act accordingly or not, because we're limited on the lobbying side, but
right. Lobby on a limited number of bills, but right.
Yeah. And then as far as, are we following this bill? Is this something that's on our radar, Todd?
We have. This bill this is not the first time this bill has come up. It's come up in the past, and we've looked at it, and we've talked about some of the risks. I know that there have been pilots in other countries and other places with guaranteed basic income. Finland did it. Everybody points to Finland, but they say, "Oh, it worked in Finland," but then they don't point out that Finland actually stopped doing it, which indicates they don't think it worked. The other interesting thing is that I have talked to several people about why we have such a low labor participation rate right now, why so many people continue to stay out of the workforce. If you've been to a restaurant recently, you will see signs that say, "Hey, we are short-staffed," and this is everywhere. And so I've talked to people about why that is, and one of the arguments that I think is most persuasive of all of them that I've heard is that we gave a huge amount of money to people who were out of work because of COVID, other things like that, and they filled their bank accounts. Well, their bank accounts are slowly coming down, but they're not empty yet. And so they just are not at the point where they need to go get a job. They can still live off the government money that was provided to them. So the same sort of incentives would apply if you give a guaranteed basic income. If it is at such a high level, then they simply won't work. And a study, I think it was by Heritage Foundation, found that Washington State has, when you look at parents with young kids and you add up all the various types of government assistance that they can get, Washington State is the most generous in the country for combined government benefits. And they calculated that it could be over $120,000. Now they did a little strange things. It was like two parents who were in their 60s of two teenagers, which I don't know how often happens, but that was the sort of model that they used. But if you're just comparing state to state, Washington gave more money than any other state. So that is another indication of sort of where we are, and adding a government basic income on top of that, a guaranteed basic income on top of that, seems counterproductive.
Well, we've got a long time left in this legislative session. It has just begun, and there will be much more commentary on it to come. We'll have Washington Policy on the Go every week, so you can catch up with us here. If you just can't stand waiting even that long, check out the Washington Policy blog at washingtonpolicy.org. Make sure you subscribe to our Friday email. That you can do that anywhere on our website, any blog. There's a sign up there. It's really easy. And then share that newsletter with your friends. Encourage them to keep track of what's happening in Olympia, get the latest, and be informed citizens, and make sure that they've got the latest news from Washington Policy Center. Todd, as always, thanks for coming on. Be sure to check out Todd's book, Time to Think Small. Your interview on C-SPAN had some replays over the Christmas time, so good for you on that. I'm sure it took the place of the Fireplace and A Christmas Story marathon in many households. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us here on Washington Policy on the Go.